Finding Our Way Home, Navigating the Journey to SDA.
Thank you so much, and it really is an honour to be part of this discussion that the Summer Foundation has every year. Such a critical role that the Summer Foundation plays in making life really life-changing for so many people. And thank you for your patience in bearing with us. I hope you notice that we're all beautifully socially distanced and abiding by all the rules. So I do hope that you are getting us loud and clear and will be able to enjoy what we bring you today. And it's really a focus about finding our way home, navigating that journey to specialist disability accommodation. We're going to call it SDA. You all know that's what it is, and that's how we'll be referring to it throughout our conversation today. We will hear from people with disability about how absolutely life-changing SDA can be and talk through what has been done to make it a reality for many more. So to kick off this conversation, we're going to take a look at a short piece which goes to the very heart of the key themes that we'll be exploring today. Let's take a look.
People with disability have more choice about where they live than ever before. With the NDIS, many have successfully navigated the journey to Specialist Disability Accommodation, or SDA, and are living happier, more independent lives. There are, however, many more that are not aware that SDA is an option. Other people have experienced difficulties along their journey to SDA.
We all have a human right to a life, and that life is living in the place you need to reach your full you.
Today, we'll celebrate just how life-changing SDA can be for people with disability and discuss what changes are in play to make SDA a reality for many more.
It's nice that the dream is not a dream anymore, it's a reality. It's about living now.
Yes, completely transformational that has been for many people. I'd now like to welcome Liz Ellis, who lives in an SDA apartment in Melbourne. Liz, lovely to meet you. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Beverly. Nice to join you too.
And you've been living in SDA for more than a year now. Let's take a look at how you were feeling when you had just moved into the SDA.
I'm Liz. I moved into my new apartment a month ago. It's really exciting because it's the first time I've lived anywhere on my own, and it's very, very cool. I was in shared supported accommodation for 6 years with people that were aged in their 50s and 60s, and it just wasn't the right model or the right setup for me. Over the years, I've yearned for something different, and I've hoped that it would come. With the apartment, it's all back in my control. Coming here is the best balance between needing help but being independent that I could possibly get. It's a home instead of someone's workplace. I love living in this area because I love the landscape. It's got everything at your fingertips when you walk out of the apartment. And it's got so many cafes that it's really amazing. I feel relieved to have a place of my own. There's a massive sense of accomplishment. It feels to me like I've broken a glass ceiling. To know now that we've got a system with the NDIS and in conjunction with other organisations to make things like this happen, it's so special.
Now, unfortunately, it seems as if we may have a few little technical difficulties chatting to Liz. She has frozen on Zoom. This is a common thing that all of you will have experienced in the last 9 months. It happens to us every day. But we had asked Liz what life was like at the moment because of the current COVID-19 restrictions and limitations, and how she was feeling having now being in her home for a little while. Let's have a listen.
1 year on living in my apartment, as I reflect back, I've managed to change service providers in a pandemic, which was an achievement in itself. I have changed my employment. I have enrolled in study, which is proving quite challenging to complete. I've also looking a bit more after my health this year and what that looks like for me into the future, and I get to do it from the comfort of my very own apartment. I've felt very appreciative and fortunate to have my apartment, given the restrictions and the lockdown that we faced, and that I had my own private space to do that in.
Yeah, so in so many ways it has been perfect timing for Liz. John O'Brien was going to be participating as a panellist today. His reason for not being here is a very joyous one as well, the best that we could think of. He received confirmation of the fact that he'd be moving into SDA just 2 weeks ago, and in fact, he moved in yesterday, which is just brilliant news. So clearly he's got some unpacking to do and things on the agenda, but he was able to share his story with us via video a little while ago, so let's take a look.
My name is Jonathan Bredin, but I prefer to be called Jono. Even though I have cerebral palsy, my family never treated me differently. This made me have the same goals and aspirations as most people. As a result, I moved out of home 3 days after I turned 26 into an independent unit. My passion is assisting people with disability to take control of their own lives. In my personal life, I have a wide variety of interests, such as computers, cooking from nothing, and watching sport. I love making curried sausages. I put the recipe together myself.
Wash it.
I'm sorry that I couldn't be here today, as I was really looking forward to it. However, I am happy to say that when you see this video, I will have just moved into my new apartment yesterday.
Yeah.
And as you can see, Jono's been living for quite a while on his own independently, but just moving into that SDA yesterday. So let's get a sense from Jono why he wanted to move into an SDA himself.
I have always dreamt of moving to the city, but I thought it was never going to be a reality, because even 3 years ago, it was impossible. But with the NDIS implementing specialist disability accommodation, SDA housing developers are now building accessible accommodation in the city. My dream of living in the big smoke just became a reality. A few years ago, my good friend, Stuart, who was the same age as my mother, passed away. I was still living at home and my mother was my primary carer. This got me thinking about what I would do if something happened to her. I didn't have the structure to live without her, so I decided that it was time for me to move out. As well as this, I was starting to struggle with privacy and independence. 4 years ago, I moved into a complex of 6 separate units, which have 24-hour support workers. I require assistance from daily living, so having access to these workers is critical for me. This living arrangement meant that I could have my privacy and freedom. It was a great first step. Around March last year, I began feeling like I needed more out of my housing situation and started to think about moving somewhere that was more suited to my needs. I told my support worker what I wanted. Then he asked me a question I didn't know the answer to. He asked me what my dream home would look like. So, we sat down and nutted out what I was actually looking for in a new place. I wasn't even looking at the city because I still thought it was impossible. Now that I had a clear vision of what I wanted, I needed to find the right people to help make it happen. Before COVID, I needed to be in the city for one reason or another, and while there I would at times impulsively decide to see a sporting match. I can't wait to be more spontaneous now that I live in the city.
And just wonderful reasons to hear there from Jono as to why he wanted to move into an SDA. I'd like to now welcome Jerry Mitra, who is the General Manager, Provider and Markets at the National Disability Insurance Agency, which of course administers the NDIS. Jerry, welcome and thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
As we've just heard from Liz and Jono, SDA can really be life-changing. Can you give us a sense of an overview of what SDA is all about and the positive impact it can have?
Sure, thanks, Bev. Look, SDA, obviously, it's a relatively new support, started in July 2016, and it is very much, as we've just heard from the two stories that we've just heard, it is about providing a different pathway and an opportunity for people with extreme functional impairment or very high support needs, to give them a different option for their housing needs and their supports. For those who are eligible, it is quite a life-changing and different way of being able to live, which is really exciting and really positive. It's not, SDA itself is not about the supports that are provided in a house, so we fund those separately and differently. And SDA itself is also not an answer to homelessness or lack of housing availability. It is a very specific support that says that the building and the way it's configured and the physical build allows the person to live in such a way that they can meet their goals better and their outcomes, combined with all of the other supports that are available in their life. So it's a new support. I think it's a very exciting thing, and it was possible because of the NDIS and the introduction of the NDIS.
Yes, I was going to ask about the background as to why they felt it needed, that this type of housing needed to evolve to this point.
So for those participants who are going to be eligible, they are the people with very high support needs or extreme functional impairment. And really this was a transition from the old system in states and territories, and the accommodation there often wasn't purpose-built and fit for purpose for this small cohort of people. It is, we estimate about 6% of NDIS participants, so we have now more than 400,000 people in the scheme. So it's not for everybody, but for those who have those very high needs, it is a really good option and a great solution.
Jerry, stay with us. Thank you very much for that. Liz, I'm going to come back to you now. I hope you are back and unfrozen. As we saw earlier, you've been living in a beautiful apartment in Melbourne. You look so happy to be there. But the journey, of course, wasn't completely smooth along the way. Give us a sense of the challenges that you've been facing in that transition.
Thanks, Beverly. No, it wasn't at all smooth sailing. At the time when I was applying for the SDA payment in NDIS plans wasn't a simple and clear pathway. It required dwellings to have the certificate of occupancy before participants could have the funding in their plan to secure their placement. So it was a very stressful, frustrating, challenging time, not knowing whether you had the housing secured to move into.
Did you find it very bureaucratic?
Yes, absolutely. It reminded me, I like to go out to music a lot, and there's a song that was regularly played called Stuck in the Middle with You. And reminded me of tug of war, and I was in the middle, and there was the NDIA and the SGA provider, and I remember having this really stressful day, and I heard this song, and I just cracked up laughing.
It sounds like you've found some very good coping mechanisms through music. But what I guess is your message to be persistent, or what do you think could improve?
I believe now the legislation has changed in that you do need to be persistent, but the legislation has changed in that you can apply for your relevant SDA category payments before a dwelling is registered as an SDA provider, which is different to when I went through it. So if that is the case, it should help people moving forward to not have the same political issues and restrictions that I had in trying to move in. But yes, you do have to be persistent and determined and know what you want.
And have a little faith, if I can quote another song.
Absolutely.
Liz, great to talk to you. We'll be back with you as we progress. But let's also hear from Jono again. He had some experiences too along the way as he navigated his journey.
In May of last year, I talked with the tenancy matching service team to tell them what I wanted, and they helped me find a place that was suitable. I told them I wanted complete control of my support workers. They asked me where I wanted to live. I said the city, but I thought there was no way. This is when they told me about a new apartment building that was being built in Docklands. That was exactly what I was after. I couldn't believe it. The tenancy matching service team helped me with filling in the application and gave me some advice on SDA. I then started the process to get all the necessary paperwork ready for my SDA application. It took a while to get everything together, but in September I submitted my application to the NDIS to get SDA in my plan. I knew SDA would be a critical part of my next house move, so I started the process before I was even offered a house. In December, whilst I was out Christmas shopping, I received a phone call informing me that I had received a conditional offer for Docklands, subject to getting SDA. I was already confident I had met the eligibility criteria to receive SDA. However, you need to keep on top of the NDIA case with the progress of your assessment. Mine took 9 months, and it was with me checking in with them weekly.
So similar story to Liz in a way that need to be persistent, to check in regularly and to have SDA as part of your NDIS plan. Well, let's welcome our first guest with me in the studios here, and it is Tony Rowe, who is a support coordinator with Disability Collaborative. Tony, welcome to you. Thank you very much for joining us. No doubt you are in touch with people with disability on a regular basis that are facing big hurdles, as we've heard from Tony, from Jono and from Liz, that they're ultimately trying to navigate the NDIS and move into more independent lives. What do you see as the key role of a support coordinator?
Look, I think it's about helping people with complex disability to imagine what's possible. And like both Liz and Jono were talking about, a lot of people just don't think it's possible. So I think that we all have a role. Anyone working in the NDIS space has a real responsibility to educate themselves as providers about what's possible. And it's not just one model, really understanding that SDA model and giving some thought to the support needs as well. I know they're currently broken into two very different categories when funded by the NDIA, but you really need to get your head around that before pursuing a particular type of SDA for a client. So, yeah.
And so in terms of what you can offer or how to navigate the system, what do you think the best way forward is?
Look, all I can talk about, Beverly, is the way I approach it, and you'll see. I think you've heard from Lisa earlier, and I actually was involved with Lisa. I met her when she was at the nursing home, and that's a really good example because I think there's an opportunity for particularly the NDIA to slow things down a little bit with these really complex people who will be eligible. As we said, 6% of a very small portion really, but to really tap in to people's experiences every time someone moves in, because I think from doing that and taking a little bit more time to understand all of the barriers and the stresses, I consider in this market that people like Liz and Jono are early adopters. They are the ones, and Lisa, they've got the courage, they're going into this new frontier, they don't fully understand when they're doing it exactly what they're going to be facing, but they've got the courage to go out there and give it a go. And I say to my clients that are on that journey that you are paving the way for other people, and
so what would be benefited by slowing the process down a little bit? What could happen? What could change?
Really understanding how much time and therefore in NDIS money is wasted having to get through the bureaucratic processes. And there really are some great planners at the NDIA working in these specialist teams, but I get the sense, and I think it's actually, unfortunately, the pressure has got more intense over the past couple of months. And if we don't slow it down and take the time to really connect with people with disability about their experiences, I think we run the risk of, leading it down, where we've been in the past. And for me, NDIS is something different, and it is a new opportunity to create a different future.
And but one that's not to be wasted as well, because you do see that concern that perhaps it will be wasted.
Yeah, and again, I know we have to have, there's constraints with financial considerations in the NDIS, but, we don't want to be wasting funding, but we've also got to be realistic, and each individual is going to be different. They're not necessarily going to fit neatly into this tick box approach, especially when first transitioning, like the people on the panel today have already shared via video link. It takes time. You can't just pull someone out of a nursing home where they've had absolutely no choice and control for sometimes. They're institutionalised. We can't just whip them out, shove them in here and go, right, now you've got to
go.
Yeah, it can take, there needs to be a bit more flexibility during that transition period, and we need to appreciate that a lot of people, not all, but a lot of people with disability have got trauma in their background because of their experience, and that risk and that looming, elephant in the room of one day I could end up in a nursing home if my mum passes away, if my, that is
ever
really
present
big.
Is really what you're saying. Tony, appreciate that. That's really, really insightful. I'm now going to move to Ben Gauntlet. Ben is the Disability Discrimination Commissioner. It's a role that he has held since mid-29. Ben, welcome to you. Thank you so much for making time for us.
For having me today, Beverly.
I know that you are super passionate about ensuring that people with disability have choice and control for where they live and how they would like to live. Essentially, though, this is something that we have to see as an absolute human right, don't we?
Yes. We all have a right to live a meaningful life. No matter what our background, no matter what our level of ability, no matter what our race, no matter what our gender, no matter what our ethnicity, no matter what our sexual orientation, we all have a right to live a meaningful life. What SDA does for people with disability in the community is it enables them to live that meaningful life where their personal wishes are respected. But for SDA to work, there is a very difficult balancing act which must be affected from a policy standpoint. First, the built environment has to be appropriate for that particular individual. Then within that built environment, the electronic environment must be appropriate for that particular individual. And finally, the communication environment that exists for that individual, again, must be appropriately set up. And at the same time, there must be a workforce at that particular location, at that particular time, with the necessary skills and availability to ensure that individual can live a meaningful life. So in saying that it is a human rights issue, it absolutely is, but the issue is, how do we solve the problem? And the problem is we need to work with people with disability to understand their needs, to support them to make decisions with all the information in front of them, and then have the market adapt quickly to resolve those issues. And what we need to do is we need to very much open up the discussion to have clear data and information being made available, but then also discussions of how can we improve? And those discussions must be forthright but respectful, because ultimately we're dealing with people who have the right to a meaningful life.
Yeah. Ben, that really sets the boundaries really, really well. So we thank you for that. I'm going to come back to one of our panelists here in the studio with me, and we certainly will come back to you, Ben, through the course of our discussion. Justin Nix is the CEO of Guardian Living. It's an organisation that is developing new SDA apartments in various locations. And Justin, welcome. Thank you very much for joining us. I understand that you are personally involved in this space since the very early days of SDA.
Yeah, no doubt, Beverly. It's so important for us as a sector, and this is a very market-driven approach, okay? It's so important, and now so more than ever, that we need to listen to the voice of people with disabilities to understand their journey, and we need to learn from that journey. And I'll give you some good examples. We continue to engage with who we think may move into our SDA dwellings, and they're not always the people that actually do. But once a person does transition, it's really important that we receive that feedback, which then influences future design. And a good example of that is an accessible bathroom is a very personal space for a person with high support needs. So by getting feedback like, you know, I love living here, but if I have a mate or my mum comes over, you know, I'd prefer to have a second bathroom, then that's the type of information and feedback that's really going to drive the market and you know, inspire innovation and really keep us on our toes.
So are you having those conversations? Do you feel as a housing provider there is enough of a flow of information between the people like we've seen, like Liz and John and yourselves?
That's challenging. It's really important that processes are streamlined as much as possible, so that, and when I talk about processes, SDA approvals are not just about the SDA approval itself. You know, we're talking about the supports that that our tenants will need living in that environment, assistive technology that they need. It's really important that we have streamlined and efficient processes and decision making, which enable us to, you know, to plan and transition people smoother into the accommodation.
Okay. Let's welcome Alicia Rathbone. Alicia is the General Manager of the Summer Foundation's Housing Hub Social Enterprise. Lovely to have you with us. You, of course, in your role being exposed to the provider experience that we've heard Justin from and that of the people with disability. So what do you feel some of the key challenges are across this area?
Yeah, absolutely. So certainly there's probably two main ones that I would touch on. The first is around the people with disability and their housing needs and preferences. So we hear a lot of people talk about the data that we need to see for demand data in the market. And it's been great. Recently, we've seen some of that data come out as a first step from the NDIA. But what we want to see is many more people with disability having the opportunity to find out about SDA and then say what their needs and preferences are. So like what you were just saying, Justin, how can we understand those at a broader scale? And then we actually provide that information in a de-identified way to the market so that people with disability can start informing what's developed. So that's one of the things that we think is a next step that would be really important, so that people with disabilities' voice is really represented. The other thing I would mention would be around the number of people with SDA in their plans. So, like I mentioned before, it's great to see some data coming out from the NDIA, and the last data set in September showed us that there's about 15,000 people so far who have the funding in their plan. So that's excellent, and that's a good way forward towards the estimated 28,000 people that Jerry mentioned before. However, we want to try and find those other 13,000 people as soon as we can. And so really thinking about ways that we can help people to see what's possible. So looking at what Lisa and Jono and Liz have done, how can we get other people to see that, imagine what's possible, and then take that way forward to explore SDA and start to realise the vision of SDA.
And to the three of you sitting with me here, how do you think that's going to happen? How do you think that's going to be possible?
If I can respond from a market point of view, the one thing that we need to do for a healthy SDA market where participants do have choice and control is we need to deploy capital into the market to build the infrastructure. The best way we can do that is by clear and consistent policy from government and the agency, and we also need to understand supply and demand. So as Alicia was saying, one thing we crave, this is for us, it's a sector that's quite full of risk from an investment point of view. What the government is asking us to do is to buy land, borrow money, build and develop to fulfil what has until recently been a hypothetical demand. We need to understand what that actual demand is. So of the 15,000 people that have SDA in their plan at the moment, what is the demand and the preference for the balance of that 13,000 people? We've got a lot of people living in existing stock SDA or really old, poor quality shared housing. We need to understand where that demand exists so that we can respond accordingly.
So Jerry, I think this would be a perfect time to come back to you to get a sense of how do you think the process can be improved for people looking to access SDA and to get this better communication between the providers and those that need it.
Yeah, thanks, Bev. And look, it's a good discussion because it highlights the different perspectives and therefore the challenges in as we continue to both develop and stabilise and implement the policy that we've got in this area. Justin's right in the sense that we have recently released a lot more data right down to a much more granular level. So it was at the SA4 level, it's now at SA3. And which effectively means that it's much easier to see where people are who have SDA in their plan and who are still looking for an opportunity. That allows investors and developers to come in and start to pay for and build new properties, which is fantastic. I think we're also, it's really interesting to listen to the conversation because sometimes we get asked to slow down, and we heard that on the panel, and sometimes we get asked to speed up, the decision making takes too long. And it is a very complex process. The thing that we've done most recently, which will still be settling, it's in the last couple of months, is to bring together more parts of the agency who make those decisions. So there are 4 or 5 different steps that we need to go through, and we're bringing that together into one team to try and improve and streamline some of those decision-making points to make it simpler and easier. There is some more work I think we can do on where we think the next lot of demand will come, and we'll continue to work on that with various people, including obviously people with disability themselves, because I think what's lovely today is to hear the experiences and the stories and reflect on how do we feed that into developers so that they can take that into account as they're doing their building and their design.
And Jerry, I'd have to ask you really at a time like this with COVID having sort of unearthed, sort of uprooted so many other systems, has that interfered with streamlining the services a little bit more, or have you been able to continue pretty much unaffected?
The NDIS has actually done remarkably well in pivoting, if you like, the services for people who are in the scheme to make sure that they can still access the scheme. We've done a lot of things like using technology to still connect with people. It was great to hear of Jono moving in still now. You know, obviously there's been more restrictions in Victoria, but we have done a remarkable job of continuing service delivery so that people are able to access their supports. In some cases, the supports have changed, but I think I don't think that slowed us down from the SDA perspective. I do think, though, it is causing us to have another good look and a think about everything that we do and how we do it and how best we meet the needs of people with disability and how we ensure that they can have the choices to access the supports that they need. So it's an evolving process.
And I'm also interested in that legislative kind of security that Justin was talking about. I mean, there's been so many other priorities that the federal government has had to take on board. Has that been sidelined a little bit, or do they just need to be made aware of what's needed?
No, so I think Justin was referring to the policy, our policy settings, and we are always working on policy settings. We have a really strong and robust process of consulting with people. So we do have a reference group of people who come together. We're just doing another core of expressions of interest for people to come on to that reference group at the moment. So we work very closely with the sector. That includes participants of the scheme, it includes advocates of participants in the scheme, it includes investors and the developers as well. So we work very closely to consult on making sure that we've got our policy settings right. So I don't think those things have slowed down in any way through this process.
That's great to hear. Thanks, Jerry. All right, let's look at some of the solutions that we need to focus on. And I'd like to come back to Alicia because, of course, you're connecting these dots every single day. In your view, what are your thoughts about the importance of the needs and preferences of people with disability being properly connected to the providers?
So it's vital and it's at the core of what needs to happen, and so it's great to hear Justin talking about that as well. So our view very much, and what we're actively doing is with the Housing Hub, we've launched a new platform. It's been co-designed by and with people with disability. It's been launched, and now we're calling for people with disability to start using that and share with us their housing needs and preferences. And that can be done through our platform and also resources on our website. And what we want to do with that is support people with disability to believe better is possible. But like Tony said too, go through that journey together and actually say, you know, what is it you want? You know, start reimagining all of the things and actually write that down and say, that's where I want to go. Mm-hmm. And then start from that point. And part of that work that needs to be done to be able to do that is capacity building for people with disabilities. So like you mentioned, Tony, a lot of people have lived in different settings that perhaps, you know, haven't meant that they can be independent, and people might not realise what is out there and what is possible. So I think a big piece of that work is reaching as many people as we can to provide that opportunity to learn about lots of housing options and then sit back and say, well, what do I want to do? Write that down, have a conversation with their planner, have a conversation with their support coordinator, and start to put that into action. So we believe that's really important as that first step. And then the part we want to play in that is not only doing the capacity building, providing the tools and resources, but if people do want to share their data with us and information, we can then work with providers and the whole market and the NDIA to put that out with people and be able to make sure that people with disability are help driving what's developed.
And Justin, is that resonating with you as you're listening to that?
Absolutely, absolutely. One thing we absolutely crave is data. We want to understand what people want and need in housing, and we should never assume that we know and understand always what people need and want in accessible housing. So certainly data, absolutely. And Alicia mentioned capacity building. This is a really important issue, not just for people with disabilities, but for the workforce as well, in supporting people with disabilities to make these decisions around choice and control. And if I reflect on some of our tenants, moving from shared supported accommodation or residential aged care into independent living models, whether they be apartments or units, you know, some people have absolutely thrived in that new environment and been connected to community, while others, you know, it's that they've found out that it's not for them. You know, there's a sense of loneliness. So it's really important that we empower people with disabilities to understand what choice and control is, and capacity building is a big part of that.
Very interesting.
I'm wondering if I can
Tony,
ask
please.
a question.
Go for it.
When you say that people have found that it's not for them, do you have a sense if there were other opportunities for capacity building and better quality supports that could have connected them to community? Because that's the thing, housing is the foundation for people to self-actualise, and you know that takes time. But what I notice is that social disconnection and the opportunity in SDA to transition out of these previous models into there, and how important for things like deinstitutionalisation to really connect the person to the community, so they've got that sense of
Without the loneliness,
yeah,
yes.
Yeah, I agree, Tony. And I think there's perhaps a little bit of a gap in the market for people experiencing other forms of housing and support, whether it's medium-term accommodation, but in transitioning from shared living arrangements and very institutionalised settings, well, what does living independently for me really look like? And that's an issue for all of us, whether we have a disability or not. So, for some people, the opportunity to try different living environments and housing and support models is a really important part of that decision-making and process.
And that's what I look forward to, is when we actually have a market where when people are looking at SDA, like for me, if I wanted to go and rent a house, I go and have a look. I can walk in.
And be much more aware of what you're getting yourself into.
Experience it, because people can't imagine what this, even providers still go on, when I raise, have you thought about SDA, when I hear about a catastrophic living, high risk environment for a person, and I say SDA, and they go, no, because they just have this image of old group homes, and this is a new frontier.
Very interesting. So Liz, is that resonating with you as you're listening to this, and what do you think would have improved your experience?
It certainly is, Beverly, thanks. Less roadblocks, but I think in light of the conversation that's been had, I think it's important that people not let other people's views of them living independently negatively impact their experience of trying to do so. I think that is a key to it as well. I know for myself, before I moved out of traditional group housing, that was the only option. I had a support worker eyeball me and said, do you really think you can live independently? And I said, sure, but with the right supports. Because people, if they don't know and they're naive and they live in the old sector thinking, then they're not going to realise that people have potential, and traditional models take that potential away from you. It took me 8 weeks of being back in my family home to go, hang on, I can go back to doing everything I have before. So I think it's about, constantly connecting with people and showing that there are different models and not the traditional model of SDA, which is the only one people often think about. But and that's, I get to do my love job now. That's a passion, but I love it, and I get to show that to people in my week now. So.
And would that, having that sort of communication that Alicia's talking about, would that made a difference from the beginning or in the early stages of your process?
Yes, I have been on the new housing hub. I think it's fantastic. I think it's got great potential. I think it helps people to visualise that there's something at the end of the tunnel. I know for me it was, like Justin was mentioning, it's a bit elusive till you're finally there. So it gives people a visual before they're there. And I do agree, it would be nice to get to a market where you can see an apartment or whatever dwelling it is before you have the funding in place.
Thanks, Liz. That's terrific. Tony, I'm just thinking back to your facial expression when you mentioned SDA and you're talking to people about this. Why is there this lack of awareness? What needs to be done to increase the awareness about SDA as an option?
Look, I don't know a straightforward answer to that, honestly, Beverly. I think that probably it starts with anyone working in the NDIS. If you're taking home income from working in NDIS, I have a personal belief that you have an obligation to try as best you can to keep yourself informed about the opportunities and the differences in NDIS. And it's just, look, again, it's also appreciating that everyone has an individual journey. I mean, I can think of one participant of the scheme, and this is also another interesting thing, is we've got this forecast, this nominal figure of who will be eligible in the numbers. I challenge those numbers because, again, a lot of people...
Do you think they're higher?
Yep.
Much higher.
And again, the high physical supports, like we were talking about, it's not there to fill gaps for housing affordability and all these other really big issues that we've got across the country at the moment. But even for those people who do fall into extreme and high physical supports categories, there's a lot of them out there and they're just not visible. And those are people that I connect with and I have touch points with, and I talk to them and explore and show them videos online and, you know, of these properties. And sometimes it takes people a while to come. You know, I had one of those clients who was at risk of going to aged care, got discharged from a big hospital about 12 months ago, categorically was not going to do it, went home, terrible home, not accessible in the slightest. And she just called me the other day and said, you know what, I'm ready. Let's go.
So it's just opening their thinking.
It's just like you've got to be able to work with people. My job is not to tell people what to do. It's to explore options and present options and really get to know them and their history and their journey and their life and what they want. And again, that dignity of risk. What's their appetite for giving things a go and supporting them to do that?
And so when you're talking about the numbers, etc., what is your assessment of the changes that have happened at the NDIA? Do you think... What are your thoughts?
Oh, look at, I don't know how many minutes have I got.
As succinctly as possible.
Yeah, look, I try and frame it. But look, if I speak from my experience, especially during this year, I have still found, like there has been improvements. I am seeing improvements in processes, but I wonder from an external perspective if there's enough to be done to educate planners within the agency. And I'm still seeing issues with really complex clients being not streamed correctly, and they're still getting their plans done by a local area coordinator, which is an outsourced contractor meant to be for less complex people. I'm seeing, you know, I was really excited when we had a change, I think earlier in the year, where, you know, senior planners could actually put forward the SDA application, and that's a cost saving. That puts, you know, means I don't have to spend, you know, 15 hours writing up a really complex report that we're talking about that usually goes to the SDA panel. And I thought, well, we'll try this out, and it's disastrous. It was absolutely disastrous. And it's, you know, I guess what I think is that again, by bringing down some of the bureaucracy wherever you can, we're going to have a more cost-effective scheme, and it's going to be a lot less stressful for people in some really bad situations. And unfortunately, there are people right now that are not in good housing situations and really at risk, and I don't think we're being quite quick enough with that.
All right. So Ben, let me come back to you. Of course, with human rights, there's central to this. How do you think, what do you think the importance of ensuring people with disability are front and centre when it comes to policy decisions that are made like this?
I think it's critical that when we make policy concerning disability in Australia, we make policy with people with disability, not for people with disability. That is, that the policy framework and the questions that are asked are informed by the lived experience of people with disability, so that issues such as the right to fail, the right to take a risky decision, the right to ask for something to live in a way that you hadn't thought possible, are all respected. To do that, we have to make sure that when we look at a person with a disability, we understand that they are to be viewed as an equal, not as a charity object, but as a person who can contribute to the discussion. And with SDA, one of the great challenges is if you ask for specialist disability accommodation and you don't get it, what do you get? What happens to the 7th percentile? It's a bit like with the NDIS itself. It's designed for 10% of people with disability in Australia. What happens to the 11th percentile that doesn't get on the NDIS? These questions require us to be really sort of policy structure driven and disciplined, and to approach this as we would the most nuanced policy debate regarding taxation or the building of infrastructure. Because the National Disability Insurance Scheme is built upon the National Disability Strategy. And we need to be really disciplined that when we look at disability policy, we ask questions of people with disability to inform the debate to create solutions with people with disability.
Ben, very solid advice there. Jerry, let me come back to you. Can you share any plans that you have for trying to ensure a smoother journey for people into SDA?
Yeah, and look, Bev, I think I'll just bounce off what Ben's just talked about, because it's a good opportunity. We are definitely thinking more about and doing more about what are the housing needs of a broader set of people and participants. And therefore, it isn't so much about, you know, can I get SDA or not get SDA, but what other supports are available in the scheme. We are currently just about to pilot another look at something we're calling independent living options, which is that sort of more flexible, broader, you can live with different people in different ways rather than just in a group home. A model that's very popular in WA and that we've been kind of working through. And so again, what we are looking to do in the future is have much more of a choice and a suite of housing options and pathways. We do a lot around complex home modifications. We've done a lot more about removing some of the barriers for people to live with family members. And so I think Ben's comment about that broader kind of picture about where the scheme goes to is very much something that I'm excited about, because I think the question is not can I go down one pathway, but much as Tony's been saying, exploring people's needs, exploring their options, exploring their choices. And that's certainly where we're headed to in the future. There are many bureaucratic challenges, of course, because these are complex decisions and we need to get them right for individuals. So we are very focused as well on caring about individuals and their individual choices, but still getting a good sense of consistency and equity and a good support for people as they make decisions.
Thank you, Jerry, very much. We've, of course, heard a lot today during our session as we are sort of getting to the end of it about just how beneficial SDA can be. Jono has been working with people with disability for a number of years, sharing his knowledge. Now, in this next little piece we're going to see, he shares his advice to others who may be feeling overwhelmed or unsure about the process of applying for SDA. Let's take a look.
Never stop dreaming and working towards making your dreams become true. Your dreams can become reality, even though it may seem impossible. For others on the journey to SDA, don't give up. There will be obstacles, but I believe the pain will be worth it in the long term.
Yeah.
And Liz, let's come back to you, of course, because you've been the star of the show here today as well, just telling us about your experience. What, again, do you think is your major takeout from what you've learned along the way?
I think I agree with Jono, and I think people need to be aware it is a lengthy process. It would be nice if it was shorter. It would also be nice if you didn't have to prove that you've tried every other living option before applying for these types of SDA. I also would say to people, enjoy the experience. You know, move with your essentials, but don't worry about everything because it will all come together in the end. Don't move on Christmas, New Year. Where you can put all your supports in place properly. It was hectic because agencies go into caretaker mode. So that was necessary at the time, but that's just a little bit of friendly advice. But just enjoy it. Once you get past all the obstacles and you put those wins on the board, just enjoy it and go. I found you got to go with it for a little while to find your feet and find your voice and find yourself again.
That is terrific advice, Liz. Thank you so much for being such a central part of our conversation today. And we're going to continue, of course, because we have been looking at getting your questions throughout the forum as we've been going through this past hour, getting your ideas as to what you would like to hear from our panelists. So we are going to take a short break in a little while, and we're going to compile all those questions, and we're going to come back and hopefully answer that with the colleagues that we've got here today and some of the decision makers that perhaps are going to make this journey to SDA for a lot more people a lot more smoother. So get your questions and answers in straight away now, and I should also remind you that links to resources and information about the steps you can take to start the journey to SDA will be available on the screen during this short intermission. So take advantage of that, get down all the information you need to know, and then we can all assist you in making that journey. So stay with us. We're going to take the short break and we'll be back very shortly.
Everybody, I'm Lisa. I love friends, and I love painting. I ended up in education because there was nowhere else for me to go. It was very lonely and then guys, I stand in the mirror and people got ignored me. I got a nice chance not to visit and then they crying and screaming. My brain is closer to me. I can't. And there was a window on one side with lots of wind that you stay down and night. I want to get out there and get them, and it's amazing what I actually fitted in that and then I didn't believe it. And come around on very lonely person. But then I come to say my name is I is wonderful. It has a kitchen and a bathroom that I don't have to share with others. Like in the nursing home. And I also had my father on this side. And the nursing home, not my imagination. And finally, then I become back. That's painting. I go shopping, and I eat what I want. And I go to the house, and wonderful. I finally failure. My number one thing is be patient. Because I never thought this was going to happen. But it did. I got them on time and good people around. Living it's better than I thought they would be. And that's amazing. And actually, it's better.
Welcome back, everybody. I hope we're back. Are we back? Yes, we are back. Lovely to have you rejoin us. And thanks to Lisa Corcoran for sharing her story during that short break as well. So we are going to move on to our questions and answer session now with our panelists. And I'm going to just go first up to Ben around issues, Ben, of a question coming in on choice and control. What if your adult child has high physical disability but also has an ID and mental illness and is not able to express their needs around housing? Are their parents able to express what housing is appropriate, do you think?
Perhaps I can give you two answers to this. The first aspect of the answer is probably what is the legal position, and the second answer is what the position we want to get to. The legal position is if a person is unable to make the decision for themselves, someone in Australia, often their parents, is able to make a decision on their behalf, provided certain criteria are met relating to what their role is, and you would expect that interest to be in the best interests of the child. But ideally, what would occur is that they would support the child to make the decision for themselves. That is, they would give the child the information to enable them to hopefully, to the fullest extent possible, describe what their needs are and what they're looking for, and to also enable them to sort of, in a sense, workshop what some of those needs are, to sort of have that debate as to what would or would not work. Now, at a human rights level, what we want to get to a position is that, to the fullest extent possible, people with disability in Australia are always supported to make decisions for themselves, rather than having someone substitute their decision for them. Again, it's the issue we want to work with people with disability to make decisions on a practical basis, not for people with disability. But the answer is that they will definitely have a role, but the role we want them to take is one of support, more so than substitution.
Ben, thank you very much for that. Liz, there's a question for you. What recommendations on how to support someone who is in need of SDA but perhaps is a little bit ambivalent about it, a little uncertain, what do you think would help if somebody is trying to support a person into SDA?
I really feel that you need to take the time with people and unpack what those reasons are. And I often find with people a little bit of informal conversation with someone like myself that's, you know, been there, done that, and everybody's had different life experiences. It helps people to be a little bit more reassured, to hear it from other people that are like them rather than other people telling them what they think they should feel. But I do think at the very start, we need to unpack what those reasons are so that we can then address those issues
right from the beginning.
Yeah, so I understand why there is that reluctance. Liz, thank you so much. Jerry, I'd like to come to you. And the question for you is around timeframes. Now, timeframes are excessive at times, often with people left waiting in inappropriate settings, example, nursing homes and hospitals. We know the stories around that. What can be done around those timeframes in terms of assessing people to be eligible for SDA?
Yeah. Well, one thing is that we would encourage people to start having conversations about their housing goals and needs as early as possible with their planners, with their family, with loved ones, with friends, because housing decisions are not made quickly. And so the more thinking and the more work that's been happening over a period of time, so that when they come to the point of applying and working through that process, things will move more quickly. But I think in answer to the question specifically, it is important to know that we do prioritise and, if you like, put to the front of the queue people who are in hospitals or nursing homes because of the level of risk. And in fact, our experience through COVID really helped us to fine-tune that process. So many people who were sitting in hospital, we needed to move out quickly. And so we really were able to kind of improve and speed up our timeframes for them. So I think perhaps just useful for people to understand that that is the priority for us, absolutely, at this point in time.
That's really comforting to hear. Jerry, thank you. Alicia, a question for you. How do we get in touch with the tenancy matching service? We are an SDA build-in provider and have vacant properties as we are struggling to close the match of the participants to the places.
Yeah, so it is a common challenge at the moment because we don't know who all of the 28,000 estimated people are yet. So you certainly can contact us. There's been some details on the screen, as well as through Summer Foundation or through the Housing Hub, and our team is very happy to help support providers to connect with housing seekers.
Okay, so just get in touch, because they have high physical needs properties in Sydney which are close to all amenities and public transports, but that would differ from market to market, I can imagine.
Yeah, so all the different markets do have different levels of supply and demand going on, and so I always think about those two sides of the market. And so yeah, we certainly need to look at that and understand what the needs of people are in that market, and are there people that are looking for that sort of property, and then we can have that conversation and work out how we can connect people.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Justin, why are two-bedroom apartments so hard to get, and can you please give us some examples of where participants have been approved for 2 bedrooms, and then what is the second bedroom used for that complies with approval? So there's multiple questions in that for you.
Real estate can be very expensive, is a short answer. So, you know, larger apartments, if we're looking at apartments in particular where you can incorporate a second bedroom, are very expensive. Now, it's important to understand that SDA funding is attached to the participant, and the participant pays the same reasonable rent contribution wherever they live, whatever SDA live, whether it's a different building type or location. As an SDA provider, the one thing we're always trying to do to ensure continuity of that funding is mitigate vacancy risk. The best way we can mitigate vacancy risk is develop SDA housing options that are incredibly well connected to the community, in close to shopping centres, public transports, and the amenity of the built environment is a big part of that. So having a second bedroom is important because people will start to vote with their feet once there is adequate supply and true choice and control. So what we've experienced is people with very high support needs obviously have a lot of equipment that they need to store in an apartment. Second bedroom's very helpful for that. A lot of people just really want that second bedroom to have mum or dad come over occasionally, or a friend stay over. And some of those people provide gratuitous support to SDA participants, which is important to acknowledge. From a funding point of view, I'd say that SDA 2-bedroom apartment approvals are very difficult to justify and source. We look at it from an amenity point of view. We always try and develop 2-bedroom apartments, but sometimes you're faced with a situation where the feasibility of developing that SDA just is not possible because of that second bedroom. So you may sacrifice that to deliver an inner city SDA option.
Terrific, thank you for that. That makes a lot of sense. Tony, when collating evidence for an SDA application, should recommendations cover a range of suitable options like fully accessible, but provide the panel with options such as an apartment or 2 or 3 bedroom house? Or is it better to just pinpoint one option only? So essentially, what will get timely and suitable results?
Look, I think the answer to that question isn't a direct answer to that question, and it really starts with the participant, the individual, and again, the work I do and the way I approach when I take on a new client and I sit down with them, and again, like to sit there and just spend a lot of time really unpacking their daily life. Why do you get up at that time? Why do you live here? What do you want to? And just really starting to unpack it. And once you really get to know and represent the person, that's how I write an SDA application, is by really getting to know that individual. And my goal is not to write down what I think their options are, it's to really have already thrashed out with that individual and really help them understand what is possible. So I've never found myself in that position where I can say, oh, either this or this or this. And I think as well...
But there's no way, essentially what I'm hearing from this question is there a way of getting through the system more quickly? No.
I don't think I'm the best person to answer that question.
Does anyone...
Jerry,
do you have an answer for that question?
It is.
A couple of things I wouldn't mind saying, which is I think it's important to remember that living independently doesn't necessarily mean living alone. And so it is, as Tony said, about a much broader understanding about people's lives and what their goals and hopes might be. Different stages in life, different needs as well. So I think that's a really important thing. If you come fixed with one view about I need to have this, that can sometimes be problematic, because equally, this is, there is a community expectation around how funds are spent, and in fact rules around how we can spend funds, and we do have to take into account the sustainability and the costs of single versus shared models. And there's no one way fits, but because we have to take into account the individual circumstances. But those things all come to play, which is why a broader thinking about housing options is so important.
Okay. Alicia, coming back to you, I've been told by DHH, the two H's?
Oh, DHHS?
Yes. Sorry. Yes. That I'm wasting my, I always thought there was only one, but that I'm wasting my time searching for SDA options unless the plan has SDA approval. Therefore, I can't support a participant to look for options without approval first. Now, that's DHS has informed me that this is a direction from NDIS implemented in July this year. Why are my participants being blocked from searching for options? And how will they know what are the good options?
Okay, well, yeah, I can talk about this from my perspective, and then perhaps Jerry might like to talk about this as well. Certainly from our experience with the tenancy matching service that we talked about before, we've supported over 370 people to get SDA funding in their plan, and based on good evidence. So if someone's been told that they aren't eligible for SDA, or I would also ask this person who's telling them. If the DHHS is telling them, that may be in the case of them being their landlord and not the NDIA. So who's telling you this? Can you talk to your planner? Can you talk to your support coordinator and get some really good evidence in place, like Tony was talking about, around what your needs and preferences are, what your lifestyle is, and therefore what type of housing you require. That would be my view.
Jerry, I think we need you to come back into the conversation.
Yeah, sure. And I think this is the point, that just because you found an empty SDA property you might want to live in doesn't mean that we will make a reasonable or necessary decision that is something that you need. So it's this thing about if you find the house and then are disappointed because you don't meet those threshold tests of extreme functional impairment, very high support needs, and a consideration about your personal circumstances and the way we can put the mix of supports together. So I think that's probably what the person's experiencing, is this frustration about perhaps I won't be eligible. And it makes it even more important that those other housing options, the independent living options, the flexibility, the home modifications, the different equipment and so on, that we have all of that as part of the conversation so that people don't feel like I've missed out altogether.
Okay, thanks, Jerry. Tony, coming back to you now, having decided, you've gone through your process, which we've understood is very key to the individual. Having decided that a person is eligible for SDA because they have very high support needs or very high functional needs, what assessment tools, example WHODAs, are used and understood by the reviewers to determine design level, which absolutely matches the individual being assessed by the reviewers, who have in fact not met the individual? Yes.
Yeah, so to do with the assessment, did I hear that correctly?
Yes.
Yeah, so look, occupational therapist report is the one to go to. And look, again, because this is such a new market, I think it's really important to seek out OTs who have a really good understanding about this, because you do see some reports, and it's not just in SDA space, it's in NDIS more broadly, where you see language coming back that just isn't what the NDIA wants to hear, and it's not speaking the same language. So if you get those kind of reports, whether it's a neuropsych or whatever the allied health professional, you can run into issues. And I think that will just, it will take time. It does need more work in that space. But again, it really depends on the individual. So it's building up your knowledge of the individual, their life, all of the people around them that support them, what their challenges are, because it won't, again, a lot of people that I work with extreme and very high support needs also have psychosocial issues. So it depends on, you need evidence. Whether it's a sleep disorder specialist, whether it's domestic violence, whether it's social workers, whether it's, it's around really helping the NDIA, SDA panel who don't have any external contact to anyone outside. So I always think, well, they're getting swamped with all these reports. What do I have to do to really give them on paper a really good understanding of who this individual is? And helping, I think there's always this, ever since the start of the scheme, this pushback on criticising the NDIA, and, the NDIA is not going to come up with all the solutions. Like, we have an obligation to help them, and that's it. We've got the time to really dig in and sell the
and to cut
solution
through it to a large degree.
Yeah.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah.
I'm going to put this to everybody, everyone who might be able to answer this question. What if you've been funded for SDA at a lower category than you wanted? Alicia, this was for you. Can you take that?
Yeah, sure. To
Sure.
start with, yes.
Yes.
Similar to before, if you've put in your SDA application, you believe you do have the extreme functional impairment or very high support needs, and therefore you believe you're eligible, you've passed the threshold for SDA eligibility there. And then if you didn't get a determination that matches what you believe you needed and what you've put forward in your evidence, you can go back and actually review that with your workers, whether that's allied health professionals, support coordinator, and you can ask for that to be reviewed and checked. And as Jerry said before, though, what you ask for does need to meet your needs. So not everyone needs to live exactly on their own, but making sure you've got that case and really clear about what it is you need and why, and what that evidence is, would be the way to progress that.
Beverly, I was going to add, look, one of the suggestions that I'd like to make from the NDIA perspective is it would be really, really helpful to get clearer guidelines and communication from the SDA panel about really how they're making these decisions. Because again, if we're out in the market at the coalface with the client, and it's my job to actually guide that person through, understand what they want, and talk to them about what's possible. And this goes back to what Jerry was saying, that NDIS isn't a free-for-all. Like, it's not whatever I want, because it's about ordinary life. And I taught my clients through this, where I say, I've even had people that go, oh, I can't believe I can't live exactly where I want right now. It's not fair to me. Well, I don't do that. I have to, I've got a criteria, like my idea of what I want to achieve, but I've got to do it within some certain rules and constraints, like my personal budget, for example. So I try and apply that, but it would be helpful to have clearer communication about, just how these SDA decisions are being made, so we can guide from the beginning and set expectations.
Yes, because it sort of doubles up on another question for you too. If I wanted to live on my own, but I was then approved for sharing, so it comes to that same issue. Jerry, we might have to throw back to you here again, just in terms of how can we simplify these processes and get clearer guidelines.
I mean, we've recently, I think it's just about, if it hasn't already gone up, put the kind of the first process of a form to fill in to capture a lot of information. We're making that publicly available. But they are such individual situations. And I do think it is something that we need to continue to develop and work on, particularly as we have more housing options that we think people should be able to consider. I think it's really important that we continue to share that sort of information out publicly. So, yeah, it's great feedback.
Well, thank you, Jerry. You will bring our conversation and our question and answer session to a close. We've been getting some fantastic feedback and fantastic questions, and we will continue to collate those if we didn't get to your question today. And they will be incorporated into a Q&A resource, which will be published on the Summer Foundation's annual public forum webpage. And the resource will also be circulated to all of you that were with us here today. So thank you to all of our fabulous panels, both remotely on Zoom and with us in the studio. It has been an incredibly informative discussion. Clearly a lot of work and finessing still needs to continue, but I think a fabulous starting point and really exciting to have heard how much it's transformed people's lives as well. But for now, let's hand you back to Paul Conroy.
Thank you, Beverly, and thank you everyone for your participation online today. Special thanks once again to all of our panellists and contributors, both in the room and on screens from where we sit. We do encourage you to keep the conversation going. So please, a video of today's forum and a Q&A document that Beverly refers to will be on our website in the next few days. But in the meantime, if you have any comments, suggestions, thoughts, we encourage you to use them through our social media channels. So please use the hashtag #JourneyToSDA. Before I wrap up, I'll just let you know that Summer Foundation released its annual report today, and that'll be on our website as we speak. There'll be a link on the screen shortly showing you how to link to that, as well as other useful documents. So finally, this concludes the annual forum for this year. Once again, thank you for your participation, and please keep well and keep safe. Thank you.